Wind pushed small white caps against the pilings and rattled the lanterns that ringed the crib. 2 miles off Cleveland's shoreline, the lake was a black plain broken by a single wooden house that stood on caissons and hummed with the machinery of the new water intake. Inside, a hoist cage clanged, a rope creaked, and men in stiff coats of lake chill stepped aboard for the night shift. It was just after midnight on July 25th, 1916. They had a few hundred feet left to bore in the tunnel that would pull cleaner water from far offshore. The foreman checked the signal line, nodded, and the cage dropped into the shaft with a dull, steady thrum. Air from below rose as cold breath. They reached the bottom and felt the change before they saw it. The tunnel air, usually damp and stale, had weight. Lamps did not burn right. The flame folded, yellow at the edges and slow in the middle. Someone joked about a storm rolling in. They pushed a muck car toward the heading. The first man to cough tried to wave it off and couldn't. Another's knees buckled like a hinge. Nobody heard an explosion. There was no rush of fire. There was only a quick collapse into quiet. Invisible gas ate the oxygen and replaced it with nothing you could fight. Picks clattered to the floor. A last lamp guttered. In the dark that followed, breathing sounded like someone else's work. Up in the crib, the signal bell stopped answering. The hoistman rapped the line, once, twice, 3 times. Nothing came back. He swore, rang the alarm, and called the city's waterworks office by telephone. Before the engine whistles on shore had finished their first notes, a rescue crew already on the barge swung the cage down with 3 men and a coil of rope. The foreman told them it was likely a cave-in and to be ready for timbers. He was wrong. Halfway along the tunnel, the rescuers felt the same slow squeeze in their chests and the lamps dimming. By the time they reached the heading, the first man had gone to his knees. They tried to drag him back and only made it as far as the shaft. The hoistman hauled them up limp, eyes open and unfocused, lungs busy but not working. 2 were dead by the time someone found their names. More boats came out from shore. Firemen brought canvas masks with hand pumps and lines that were supposed to feed fresh air, but the hoses kinked and the pumps couldn't keep up with a tunnel that breathed like a bellows in reverse. Officers argued over who would go down next and whose equipment would work. The second rescue party took turn after turn too long and quit responding. A third followed, and again the bell went still. The count of the living changed faster than the list on a clipboard. Dawn grayed the lake. Smoke from the city lay flat on the water. The newspapers would say, explosion. Men on the crib understood it as something worse, gas thick as night, a thing with no face. On the near west side of the city, a 39-year-old inventor named Garrett Morgan read the first morning bulletins and told his wife he was going. For years, he had been making and selling a safety hood, a canvas helmet with a long hose that drew air near the ground, where smoke was thinnest, and a wet sponge that knocked some fumes out. Fire departments had bought some after a demonstration, but most men who worked underground still trusted luck and speed. Morgan loaded his car with hoods, grabbed his brother Frank and 2 volunteers, and drove toward the shore as the sun pushed through haze. At the pier, police tried to wave him off the boats. Reporters jotted the argument without names. Morgan said he had breathing devices that worked. An officer said he had his own and pointed at a rack of masks that had brought up only bodies. Someone in charge decided there was nothing to lose. Morgan's party put on the heavy canvas and the glass goggles. They looked like divers from a newspaper cartoon. The boatmen stared, then set their jaws and ferried them out. Down in the shaft, the air was the same suffocating mix that had stopped men in their tracks all night. Morgan's team moved slowly, the way you do when you are not sure how long the air you bring will last. They passed a pile of tools, a cap, a lamp still warm. The first body lay on his side as if napping, mouth open, lips blue. Farther on, 2 men leaned against the wall like they had sat down to rest and fallen asleep in the same second. Morgan tied a lifeline under one man's arms. The hoist took his weight. When the rope came back down, they sent another, then another. Not all of them breathed again when they reached the crib deck. Some did. A fireman later said he had never seen anyone carried so gently in a place that did not usually offer gentleness. On the surface, daylight showed rings of oil on the lake and the square hunched shape of the crib against the glare. The crowd on deck had grown, a tangle of city men in hats, waterworks crews, and wives who had run to the pier when someone brought a name ashore that sounded familiar. There were arguments over who would go next and who had already done enough. Morgan and Frank went back down. When they came up this time, the inventor peeled off his hood and put the mouth of his own air hose to a laborer's lips, trying to will breath into lungs that had forgotten the trick. A doctor shook his head once, and Morgan moved to the next. It went on through late morning and into noon, in slow revolutions of the hoist drum and black water dripping from the cage. The undertaker's wagon came from the city and sat quiet with its curtains drawn while men measured themselves against the day. The last to come up alive had been nearest the shaft, where what little air moved still found you. The ones at the heading did not. A priest wiped his forehead with a sleeve and began again. City officials counted and recounted. When they said 21 dead, men shook their heads. By sundown, a few more names had moved to the wrong column. In the days that followed, the explanations hardened into facts, and the facts into blame. The tunnel had broken through a pocket of gas. After damp, black damp, the words changed, but the thing did not. That had sloped into the heading from a fissure and milled there until men breathed it and fell. No one had tested properly that night. The safety line signals had been read as delay, not distress. Rescue equipment had been old and the training thin. City council took testimony. Engineers explained how air moves in a long tube under pressure differentials nobody can see, and how simple lanterns tell you enough if you watch the flame. The water department promised new masks, new drills, a better way to pull men out when they stop answering. Garrett Morgan gave interviews about the hoods and the men, in that order, because reporters asked about gadgets first. He was measured in his words, and particular in his thanks for the volunteers who had gone down with him. Some papers minimized his part or scrubbed it when they learned he was black. Others printed his name and sold that paper quickly in streets where people had heard what he had done from witnesses who didn't care about color when the cage was in the air and the rope was moving. Weeks later, when the city handed out medals, there were men missing from the stand who had earned the medal as much as any. Morgan kept working anyway, his device improved, his traffic light refined. His place in that morning set, even if the city did not write it cleanly. Work in the tunnel stopped until the gas dispersed and new protocols were written. The intake would become part of the unseen system that keeps a city alive. Pumps hidden in houses on the lake, valves under streets, iron mains that carry water into kitchens where it runs bright from a tap, and nobody asks what it takes to keep it that way. The crib where men died went back to humming. Families in the flats and on the west side washed dishes that night with the same water the city always brought them. They told children not to go out on the pier, and they sold the extra chair at the kitchen table, and they learned the dull, lasting way grief arranges itself around what must be done next. On anniversaries, the numbers get the headline. 21, then the additional deaths in the days that followed. 2 miles offshore. A tunnel at the very edge of what men with picks and compressed air could open safely. The details that matter don't make neat lines. A hoist bell that stopped answering. A lamp flame falling in on itself. A man who had built a respirator so someone would have a better chance and then took it into the hole himself. A city that learned again the same lesson it keeps learning. A system is only as safe as the training, the tools, and the courage of the people who pick them up in the dark. The lake looks the same from shore on mornings like that one. Flat, a little mean, wind counting off the posts along the breakwater. The crib that stood then is gone or changed, replaced by newer structures in deeper water, but the tunnel is still down there, one of several that work without complaint. When the faucets run, they bring cold that started miles offshore and came through rock and pipe because someone made the path and someone else kept watch. It is worth saying the names of the men who went down to make sure that path did not become a tomb. Thank you for listening to Road to Ruins. Subscribe for more true stories where systems fail and people pay the price.